Today, I want to share with you a moving story set in the rugged heart of the American frontier. A tale of love lost and found, of sacrifice, and of second chances. It is the story of Ray, an Apache warrior, and Fawn, the woman who never truly stopped loving him, even through years of sorrow. Now let us begin their journey together. The desert wind carried the smell of dust and mesquite, the kind of scent that clung to a man's skin no matter how far he traveled. Ray lifted his gaze to the horizon, where the late summer suns sank red into the mountains. He had not seen these ridges in 3 years, not since the army had pressed him into service as a scout and fighter during the long border campaigns. The Apache blood in him had made him valuable to officers who wanted guides through rough country, but it had also branded him as an outsider among both soldiers and his own people. Now 31 years old, Ray rode back into the country of his youth, carrying nothing but a rifle, a saddle-worn horse, and a heart full of ghosts. He thought of Yunez. He rode the pale-haired woman with gentle hands who had once chosen him over the safe regard of other men. She had been 19 then, fragile in appearance but with eyes that defied the world. Against all custom and warning, she had married him, an Apache, in a land where such unions drew more suspicion than blessing. For a short while, they had made a life together on the edge of the settlement, her tending a small garden, him breaking horses and hunting game. When the soldiers came calling, Ray had left with the conviction that he was protecting her by serving, earning respect, and maybe buying peace for their people. He told her it would not be long. He kissed her on the porch of their cabin, promising to return. That was the last he saw of her. Now, as his horse crested the final ridge, Ray's chest tightened. The valley below spread wide and familiar, the creek winding silver through the grass, the cottonwoods whispering in the dusk. His eyes searched hungrily for the cabin, the home he had dreamed of, in long, starved nights under military canvas. The cabin was still there, but the sight struck him like a blow. The roof sagged in places, one shutter dangled loose. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. The small garden fence was broken, weeds curling through. It looked abandoned, forsaken by the life they had once planted there together. Ray dismounted slowly, boots crunching on the dry earth. He pushed open the cabin door, its hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air smelled of dust and disuse. The table where June once laid out bread was bare. The small quilt she had stitched was gone from the bed. Only shadows remained. His throat tightened. He had imagined her waiting, imagined her rushing into his arms with tears and laughter. Instead, he found silence and emptiness. He wandered the valley for a time, asking questions of ranch hands and peddlers along the road. The answers came reluctantly, some pitying, some edged with suspicion at the sight of an Apache man asking after a white woman. Yet the pieces fit together soon enough. June was alive, but she was no longer his. The name cut deeper than a knife. Thomas. Ray remembered Thomas well, a tall, steady man, once his closest companion. They had ridden together in younger years, broken wild horses side by side, even shared whiskey in the glow of campfires. Thomas had been the kind of man Ray thought unshakable, loyal as bedrock. To hear that, Thomas now lived with June married to her, made Ray's stomach clench. For a long time he sat alone by the creek, watching the water slide over stones, polished smooth by years. He tried to make sense of it. June had promised to wait. Thomas had been like a brother. Had they both betrayed him? Or had the world simply gone on without him, leaving him the fool who believed in promises stronger than time and death? The wind stirred, carrying the faint cry of a coyote across the valley. Ray's hands balled into fists. He wanted to be angry, to curse June's name, to condemn Thomas. But anger faltered in the face of weariness. He had been gone 3 years. 3 years without word, without return. What had he expected, that she would live like a ghost, forever waiting at the cabin door? Yet another thought, cut deeper still. If she had chosen Thomas, perhaps she had never truly loved him at all. He shook the thought away, like a rattlesnake's hiss. But it coiled in his heart. That night, Ray made camp in the shadow of the cottonwoods, his fire small, hidden. He lay awake listening to the creek, remembering June's laughter, the way her hair caught sunlight like wheat. He remembered the night before he left, how she had clung to him, as though she already knew fate's cruelty. "Come back to me, Ray," she had whispered. "Promise me." "I promise," he had said. And yet here he was, returned to a world that had moved on. The next morning, he saddled his horse and rode toward town. He needed supplies and maybe answers. Dust rose in clouds behind him as the trail widened into rutted road. The town of Dry Creek had grown since he last saw it. More buildings lined the street, new saloons, a blacksmith shop, even a schoolhouse. Children's voices rang out in the yard, shrill with play. Men in broad hats leaned against posts, watching him with guarded eyes. An Apache in town was never a welcome sight. Ray ignored their stares. He tied his horse near the general store, stepped inside, and felt the air thicken. Conversations stilled. The storekeeper, a gray-whiskered man, narrowed his eyes but said nothing. Ray gathered what he needed: coffee, flour, cartridges, and laid them on the counter. His hand went to the pouch at his belt where he kept army pay, tarnished coins that still bore the eagle crest. It was then, through the glass window, that he saw her. June. She was across the street, sunlight spilling over her hair, her arms full of cloth from the dressmaker's shop. And beside her stood Thomas. The years had marked her but not dimmed her beauty. There was strength now in her posture, a quiet resilience in the way she moved. Thomas hovered near, protective, his hand steady on her elbow as though she might stumble. And then Ray's gaze dropped lower. A small boy trotted at her side, clumsy in his little boots, clutching a wooden toy horse. He laughed, a bright sound that pierced Ray's chest. The boy's face turned toward the store window for an instant, and Ray's heart nearly stopped. The child's eyes were dark, almond-shaped, the eyes of his own people. His skin carried a warm bronze beneath the summer sun, his hair straight and black as midnight. Ray gripped the counter until his knuckles whitened. The boy could not have been more than 3. 3 years. The same years Ray had been gone. He forced himself to look away, to breathe. Perhaps it was coincidence, a trick of features. But in his chest a terrible suspicion took root. Outside, June bent to straighten the boy's hat. For one instant, her eyes lifted, meeting Ray's through the window. Recognition flared there, shock, sorrow, and something else he could not name. Ray turned away before Thomas noticed, his pulse hammering in his ears. He left the store without speaking, mounted his horse, and rode hard from town. The wind tore at him, but it could not strip away the image burned into his mind. June alive, married to Thomas, and a boy whose eyes mirrored his own. Ray did not know the truth. Not yet. But for the first time since his return, he felt the stirrings of a storm greater than war, the storm of love lost, loyalty broken, and questions that could no longer be ignored. The sun was high when Ray reined his horse at the outskirts of Dry Creek again. He had told himself he wouldn't return so soon, but his body betrayed him. The memory of June's eyes, wide with recognition, shining with something close to sorrow, pulled him back like a rope. He hadn't spoken to her, hadn't heard her voice in 3 long years. If he was going to find any peace, he needed answers. The town bustled with the usual trade. Wagons creaked down the main street, driven by sweating mules. Cowboys leaned out of the saloon, calling to each other. A preacher's bell rang from the far end, summoning a few dusty families inside. Yet Ray felt the stares as he rode in. An Apache on horseback, scarred by war, was never invisible in a settlement like this. He ignored them and slid off his horse near the livery. As he tightened the reins, movement caught his eye. Across the street, near the smithy, stood Moon. She was speaking with the blacksmith's wife, a bundle of mended clothes in her arms. The boy tugged at her skirt, impatient, clutching a piece of candy. Ray's chest tightened. The child's laughter echoed in his ears. And then Thomas appeared, stepping out from the smithy with an easy gait. His sleeves rolled up, a smile offered freely to the boy. He bent and lifted the child onto his shoulders, as if he'd been born to it. The sight should have kindled rage in Ray, his closest friend playing husband to the woman he'd loved, father to a boy that might be his own. Yet what he felt instead was confusion, because Thomas looked happy, content even. Ray took a step closer, but the boardwalk creaked under his boots, drawing eyes. Thomas turned, saw him, and for a moment, his whole body stilled. "Ray," Thomas said at last, disbelief roughening his voice. June's head snapped around, her face paling. She froze, clutching the bundle tighter, as though her heart had leapt into her throat. Ray stood there in the dust, his hat shadowing his eyes. "Thomas," his voice was flat, careful. "You're alive." Thomas's words were half statement, half prayer. He set the boy down gently, as though afraid of what might come next. "They said you were—" He broke off, shaking his head. June finally found her breath. "Ray." It was scarcely more than a whisper. Her lips trembled, and she pressed a hand against her breast, as if steadying her heart. The boy looked between them, with the innocent curiosity of children. "Mama, who's that?" June knelt quickly, brushing his hair back. "No one, sweetheart. Just an old friend." The word struck Ray like a lash. An old friend. He wanted to demand the truth, to shout the questions burning in his chest. Why had she married Thomas? Why hadn't she waited? Whose son was the boy? But the street was too full of eyes, the air too heavy with the weight of gossip ready to spread like wildfire. Thomas seemed to understand. He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Not here. Come tonight. My place. We'll talk then." Ray hesitated, his pride screaming at him to refuse. Yet June's eyes, wet with unshed tears, held him. Against his will, he gave a single sharp nod. Then he turned on his heel and strode away, the murmurs of townsfolk following him like dust. That evening, Ray lingered outside the edge of town, watching the ski turn to embers. The cabin Thomas lived in wasn't far, a modest home near the creek, with a corral and small garden. Through the window, he saw lamplight glowing, shadows moving inside. June laid the table. Thomas lifted the boy into a chair. It looked like a family ordinary, warm, complete. Ray's throat ached at the sight. That was supposed to have been his life. When Thomas finally stepped out onto the porch, Ray straightened. His old friend studied him in silence, then motioned him over. Inside, June busied herself with dishes, though her hands shook. The boy sat chewing bread, eyeing Ray with open curiosity. His little legs swung beneath the chair, too short to touch the floor. Ray could barely breathe. Every tilt of the boy's head, every flicker of expression, it was like seeing his own childhood reflected back at him. Thomas cleared his throat. "Sit. Eat with us." Ray stayed standing. "I didn't come for food." June turned, her face pale but steady. "Then what did you come for?" Ray's voice hardened. "For answers." The room fell into a hush, broken only by the crackle of the fire. June's fingers clenched around her apron. She opened her mouth, but Thomas spoke first. "She thought you were dead, Ray. We all did." His tone carried no defensiveness, only weary truth. "A letter came. Said you fell in the San Carlos campaign. I saw it myself. Ray frowned, the memory of endless marches and blood-stained trails flooding back. He had been injured, yes, left for dead once. Could the army have sent word of his death in error? Or had someone wanted him erased? June's voice trembled as she spoke. I was heavy with child when that letter came. I didn't know how I could go on. And then Thomas. Her throat closed. She looked away, blinking hard. Thomas was there. He helped me when no one else would. Ray's gaze swung between them, the storm in his chest threatening to break. So you married him. June's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't about love, Ray. It was survival. For me. For my baby. The boy glanced up at the word baby, his mouth sticky with crumbs, unknowing of the storm swirling over his head. Ray's fists tightened at his sides. He wanted to demand more to hear her say, whose son the boy truly was. But Thomas's steady gaze held him, warning him that the truth wasn't yet ready to be spoken aloud. Instead, Ray turned for the door. His voice was low, raw. You built a life without me. I'll not stay to watch it. Ray, wait. June reached out, but her hand fell short. He stepped into the night, the cool air biting after the heat of the room. Behind him, he heard the faint sound of June's sobs, muffled quickly for the boy's sake. Ray walked into the darkness, each step heavy with fury and grief. He did not yet know the whole story, but one truth gnawed at him with cruel persistence. The boy's eyes, so like his own, would not let him rest. Later that night, camped alone by the river, Ray sat with his rifle across his knees. The moon silvered the water, and the coyotes sang again. He replayed every glance, every word. June's trembling hands, Thomas's quiet firmness, the boy's laughter. 3 years gone, and the world had rearranged itself without him. Yet blood had a way of binding past to the present, and Ray could not shake the suspicion that the boy under Thomas's roof was his own flesh and blood. Sleep would not come. Only questions, sharp as thorns, and a dawning certainty that the answers, when they came, would tear open wounds that might never heal. June had not meant to remember that winter night, yet Ray's return had torn open the seam she had stitched shut with trembling hands. As she lay awake in the small cabin she now shared with Thomas and the boy, memories rose like smoke from a fire, thought long dead. 3 years ago, she had stood on the porch of that first cabin, hers and Ray's, watching him ride away with the cavalry column. His dark hair had lifted in the wind, and he had turned once to raise his hand, his eyes solemn, his mouth set in the promise of return. She had believed him with the whole of her 19-year-old heart, believed that love could shield them from the world's cruelties. For the first months, she held fast to hope. She kept the cabin neat, tended the small patch of corn and beans. She prayed each night for his safety. It was during that summer that she felt the first faint quickening within her body, the flutter of new life. She remembered pressing her palm to her belly, whispering to the child that Ray would come home before it was born. But then came the letter. She could see it as clearly as if it still lay on the table before her. A folded paper, mud-stained, carried by a young soldier with pity in his eyes. His words were clumsy, but the letter's message clear enough. Ray had fallen during a skirmish near San Carlos. His body lost. The soldier had pressed the page into her hand and muttered condolences before hurrying away, leaving her standing in the doorway with the world collapsing at her feet. She read the letter until the words blurred. Bravery, service, sacrifice. Empty phrases, each one a nail in her coffin of hope. That night, she wept until her throat burned, clutching the quilt Ray had once used against the chill. In her belly, the child shifted, as though reminding her she was not alone. But the town was not kind. Whispers followed her when she walked to fetch water. Apache's woman, they called her, carrying his half-breed child. Some turned their backs, others spat. Work grew scarce. By the time her belly swelled heavy, she could no longer tend the garden or chop wood. Hunger gnawed at her, and loneliness pressed in like winter ice. It was then that Thomas appeared. She remembered that evening clearly, the sound of hooves, then a knock at the door. She had not seen Thomas since before Ray left. He stood tall in the twilight, a sack of flour slung over his shoulder. His eyes, once bright with easy laughter, now held a gravity she had never noticed before. "I heard," he said simply, "about Ray, about the baby." June had tried to be proud, to tell him she needed nothing, but her voice cracked, and tears betrayed her. Without a word, Thomas set the flour on the table, then set to mending the sagging roof where snow seeped through. Over the weeks that followed, he came often splitting wood, patching fences, bringing food when her pantry ran low. When the time of birth came, she nearly died. Alone, she might have. The pains tore through her for 2 days and nights. She screamed until her voice broke. Neighbors kept their distance, some out of disdain, others out of fear. But Thomas was there. He boiled water, fetched rags, and when her strength faltered, held her hand and urged her to breathe. At dawn on the 3rd day, the boy's first cry split the air. June collapsed back, drenched in sweat, clutching the tiny body to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, not only of joy, but of grief. For Ray should have been there. The child's dark eyes opened, and she whispered his father's name. Thomas, exhausted but smiling, looked at the baby with quiet awe. "He's strong," he said, "like his pawpaw." June had turned her face away, unable to bear the reminder. She feared the world would see only Ray's blood in the boy, and condemn them both. But Thomas's gaze was steady. "Let me help," he said. "Let me give him a name folks won't spit on." At first she refused. Pride and loyalty bound her. But winter was cruel, and mouths whispered sharper than wind. With no husband's protection, she would have been cast aside, her child branded a bastard of a dead Apache. So when Thomas asked again, this time with gentleness, not pressure, she said yes. Not because she loved him, not because her heart had let Ray go, but because survival demanded it. And Thomas, in his quiet way, became husband in name, father in deed. He never raised his voice, never demanded more than she could give. He worked the land, provided food, and shielded them from gossip. Still, the nights were long. June would sit by the fire, nursing her son, and her thoughts would wander back to Ray. She remembered the strength of his arms, the way he spoke to her in low tones, as though the world outside their cabin mattered less than the breath between them. She wondered if death had been kind to him, if he had thought of her in his last moment. And she whispered to the boy that his father had been brave, that he must carry that same courage in his blood. Time dulled the sharpest edge of grief, but it never erased it. She went on because she had to, not because she wanted to. Now, years later, Ray stood alive before her eyes, and the old wound gaped wide again. She had wanted to throw herself into his arms, to weep out all the years of longing. But then the boy had tugged her skirt, calling her mama, and Thomas had steadied her elbow with that familiar touch. Gratitude bound her where love once had. And so she had called Ray an old friend. That lie tasted like ash on her tongue. In the dim cabin light, June turned from her sleeping son, her heart aching. If Ray demanded her back, what could she do? If Thomas discovered the full truth, that her heart had never ceased to belong to another, what hurt would that bring to the man who had saved her? She pressed her hand to her chest and whispered into the dark, "God help me. I can't lose either of them." But the truth had already begun to surface, as unstoppable as the tide. And June knew deep down that before long, everything she had tried to bury would come crashing into the light of day. Ray tried to stay away. He told himself he wanted no part of that house where June and Thomas and the boy lived. Yet each evening, as dusk settled across the valley, his horse carried him closer, until he found himself watching from the trees, silent as a shadow. From his hiding place, he saw the life they led. Thomas chopping wood, his broad shoulders straining with each swing. June hanging clothes in the pale light, her hair pulled back, but glimmering when the sun caught it. The boy tumbling in the dirt, chasing chickens, laughing when Thomas lifted him high. Ray's heart twisted at every sound. The laughter of the boy. It was like hearing his own childhood echo back across the years. He remembered being that small, running through mesquite and sand, his father lifting him onto a pony for the first time. The boy's eyes, black as night, mirrored his own. The tilt of his head, the stubborn set of his jaw, all pieces Ray recognized in the mirror. Suspicion grew into certainty. One evening, the boy fell trying to climb a fence. His cry pierced the air. June rushed to gather him, murmuring comfort. But Ray, hidden, saw something more. The way the child set his mouth in a tight line, refusing to weep further. It was the same expression Ray had worn as a boy, taught never to show weakness. Ray's chest burned with questions. He wanted to stride up to the cabin door and demand the truth. But what then? Drag June from Thomas's side, shatter the fragile life that man had built for her. His honor balked at such a thing, even as his blood cried for recognition. It was Thomas who finally broke the silence. One night, as the moon lifted over the hills, Thomas came to Ray's camp. He walked without fear, though his steed carried a heaviness. His breath sounded ragged, and when he drew near the firelight, Ray saw the pallor in his face, the damp sheen of sweat across his brow. "Mind if I sit?" Thomas asked. His voice was calm but strained. Ray said nothing, only gestured to the log opposite the flames. For a while they sat in silence, the fire popping between them. Then Thomas coughed a deep, tearing sound that bent his shoulders. When he pulled the cloth from his lips, Ray glimpsed the dark stain of blood. Ray frowned. "You're sick." Thomas gave a humorless smile. "I've known for a while. The coughing started last winter. Now it's worse. The doctor calls it consumption. Says it doesn't forgive." Ray felt an unexpected pang. This was the man he had once called brother, the man who had stood at his side in 100 trials. Seeing him diminished struck harder than any bullet. Thomas leaned forward, eyes fixed on the fire. "You've been watching the boy. I've seen you." Ray stiffened, his hand clenched around his knee. "You know, don't you?" Thomas's voice was low, almost weary. Ray hesitated, then spoke rough as gravel. "I see myself in him." Thomas nodded slowly. "Because he's yours." The words dropped like stones into the silence. Ray's breath caught. Even when he had suspected, even when he'd all but known, hearing it said aloud cut through him. Thomas's eyes lifted to meet his, steady despite the sickness clouding them. "June didn't know she carried your child when you left. She found out after the letter came. She believed you were dead, Ray. We all did. And she was alone. Folks in town would have torn her apart for bearing your son without a husband." Ray closed his eyes, the pain of it pressing heavy. "So you stepped in." "I stepped in because she needed someone, because the boy needed a name, and because you were my friend." Thomas's voice cracked, the first hint of rawness breaking through. "Do you think it was easy raising another man's son while she whispered your name in her sleep? Do you think I didn't know where her heart still belonged?" Ray's jaw tightened. "Then why do it?" Thomas coughed again, his shoulders shaking. When the fit passed, he wiped his mouth and said quietly, "Because I loved her too. Not the way she loved you, but enough to keep her safe. Enough to let her have a life when she thought you were gone." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Ray stared into the flames, the weight of revelation sinking into him. His anger had nowhere to land. He could not fault June for surviving, nor Thomas for protecting her. The real enemy was the lie of that letter, the cruel trick of fate that had stolen 3 years from them all. Finally, Thomas spoke again, softer now. I won't last the year, Ray. Maybe not even the season. When I'm gone, they'll need someone. She'll need you. And the boy. He swallowed, his voice breaking. He deserves to know his father. Ray's chest ached with conflicting tides, gratitude, guilt, sorrow. He looked at Thomas, saw the hollowed cheeks, the tremor in his hands, and realized the man had already given everything he had left. You ask much of me, Ray said hoarsely. Thomas gave a faint smile. No, I'm asking what you already want. To claim them. To keep them safe. He pushed himself unsteadily to his feet. But promise me one thing, Ray. Don't make June choose between us, even in memory. Let her keep her gratitude for me and her love for you. Don't tarnish either. Ray stood too, instinctively reaching to steady him when he swayed. For a moment, they were as they once had been, two men bound by friendship deeper than blood. Only now one stood on the edge of life, the other holding the burden that would follow. Thomas's breath rasped. Take care of them. Ray's voice, low and fierce, answered, I will. Thomas gave a single nod, then turned toward the cabin, his steps slow, each one a struggle. Ray watched until the shadows swallowed him. Alone by the fire, Ray sank back onto the log. The night pressed close, heavy with stars. In his mind, he saw the boy's dark eyes, saw June's trembling smile, heard Thomas's cough tearing through the silence. The truth was out now. The boy was his son. June was still his wife in spirit, if not in law. And Thomas, the man who had carried them through the storm, was feasting. Ray bowed his head, whispering into the night, God forgive us all. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the northern ranges with bitter winds that rattled the shutters and left frost upon the windows come morning. In the Sullivan cabin, the fire burned day and night, yet it seemed never enough for Thomas. His cough worsened. At first it was only at night, a hollow rasp that kept June awake as she rubbed his back. But by December, the sound haunted every hour. He grew thinner, the skin stretched tight across his cheekbones. His once steady hands now trembled when he tried to split kindling or lift the boy. June fought to keep the house warm, the meals hearty, her spirit strong. She refused to let despair take root. Each day she carried water, baked bread, mended clothes, all with quiet determination. But at night, when Thomas finally slept, she sat at the table with her head in her hands, shoulders shaking in silent grief. Ray knew. He saw it in her eyes when they met at the well, in the way her hands lingered on the boy, as though anchoring him against a storm she could not control. He longed to reach out, to hold her, to tell her that she was not alone. Yet he kept his distance, honoring Thomas's place while he yet lived. It was Thomas himself who broke that fragile balance. One evening, when the boy had gone to bed, Thomas called Ray into the cabin. June hovered near the hearth, her eyes wary but not resisting. Thomas sat at the table, a blanket draped over his shoulders, his breath shallow. He gestured for Ray to sit. I won't waste words, he said. You've seen what's happening. The doctor gave me months, maybe less. I believe him. June closed her eyes, her hand tightening around the back of a chair. Thomas's gaze shifted to her, softening. You've carried more than your share, June. I've tried to ease it, but I know I was only a poor substitute. Don't, she whispered fiercely. You saved me. Saved us both. There's no substitute in that. He smiled faintly, then looked back at Ray. Still, the truth can't be denied. The boy is his son. He deserves to know. June's breath caught. For the first time in years, her eyes met Ray's fully, and he saw the flood of feelings she had buried: love, sorrow, longing, and guilt, all tangled together. Thomas coughed hard, blood staining the cloth he pressed to his lips. When the fit passed, he continued in a rasp, "Ray, I'm entrusting them to you. Not because I must, but because it's right. I've done what I could. But when I'm gone, they'll need more than memories. They'll need you." Ray's throat closed. He had faced death in battle, but never this kind of surrender. "I won't fail them," he said hoarsely. June turned away, tears streaking her cheeks. She pressed her hand against the wall, as though it alone kept her standing. Thomas reached for her hand and held it weakly. "June, don't let gratitude chain you. When I go, grieve if you must, but live. The boy deserves a father, and you—" He paused, catching his breath. "You deserve love." Her sob broke free then, raw and aching. She knelt beside him, clutching his hand against her face. "You gave me more than I ever hoped for, Thomas. You gave me safety when the world turned cruel. I'll never forget." Ray looked away, giving them that moment, though every word cut him deep. The weeks that followed were a slow farewell. The boy grew quieter, sensing the shadow, though he did not understand. He would sit beside Thomas, bringing him sticks or small stones as treasures, waiting for stories that came less and less often. June moved through the days like a woman fighting both time and fate. She refused to speak of what was coming, yet her every action carried urgency, as though, if she scrubbed hard enough, cooked heartily enough, loved fiercely enough, she might hold death at bay. Ray helped where he could. He brought meat from his hunts, chopped wood, repaired the roof before the snows grew heavy. Yet always he kept his distance, careful not to overstep. The boy sometimes ran to him, eyes bright, calling his name, and Ray's heart swelled with both pride and restraint. Then, one gray dawn, the end came. June woke to the sound of ragged breathing. She lit the lamp and found Thomas struggling, each gasp a battle. She called for Ray, and he came running, boots thudding against the frozen ground. Thomas's eyes were glassy, yet when they found June, a peace settled over him. "It's time," he whispered. She clutched his hand, tears falling unchecked. "No, stay. Please, just stay." He shook his head faintly. "No more pain. Just promise me." His gaze shifted to Ray, then back to her. "Promise you'll let him carry you when I can't." June bent over him, pressing her forehead to his. "I promise," she choked. Thomas's breath rattled once more, then stilled. His hand went slack in hers. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. June collapsed against his chest, sobbing. The boy stirred from his cot, toddled over in confusion, and tugged at her sleeve. "Mama? Papa?" His small voice broke Ray's heart. Ray knelt, gathering the child into his arms, holding him close as June wept. He whispered into the boy's hair, "He loved you. Remember that always." They buried Thomas on a rise overlooking the valley. The ground was frozen hard, but Ray worked until his hands bled, carving out the resting place with grim determination. June stood beside him, pale and silent, clutching the boy. When it was done, they laid Thomas to rest with his rifle at his side, the earth covering him, as snow began to fall. June placed a single sprig of cedar atop the mound, her breath a cloud in the cold air. As they turned to leave, June faltered. Ray caught her elbow, steadying her. For a moment, she leaned into him, her weight a silent plea. He wanted to gather her close, to tell her she would never be alone again. But he held back. Grief was still too raw, the wound too fresh. Back at the cabin, the boy curled against June and slept. She sat staring into the fire, her face streaked with tears, her hands limp in her lap. Ray stood near the door, torn between leaving and staying. Finally he spoke, voice low. He asked me to care for you, for both of you. June looked up, her eyes red but steady. Did he tell you? Yes, Ray said softly. I know the boy is mine. Her breath shuddered out. Relief and sorrow mingled. I never wanted to lie. I thought you were gone, Ray. When Thomas came with the letter, when months turned to years, her voice broke. I did what I had to for the child. Ray crossed the room, kneeling before her. He took her trembling hands in his. You did what was right. And Thomas? He was more a man than most. I'll honor him by keeping his promise, by keeping you safe. June's tears spilled anew, but this time she did not look away. For the first time since their reunion, she let him see all that lay in her heart, the grief, the love that had never died, the fragile hope flickering in the shadows. And in that silence before the fire, they began the long journey from sorrow toward something new. The weeks after Thomas's burial passed in a haze of silence and cold. Winter held the valley tight, snow lying heavy on the pines, the creek frozen in its banks. June moved through the cabin like a ghost, tending the boy, keeping the fire alive, but speaking little. Ray stayed near, never forcing himself upon her, never presuming. He chopped wood until piles stacked high against the wall, hunted deer and rabbits to keep the table full, repaired the roof where snow threatened to break it. His presence was steady, like the mountains themselves silent, enduring, unyielding. At night, when the boy cried for Thomas, Ray would sit beside his bed, humming soft Apache songs his own mother had sung to him. The child quieted to those rhythms, clinging to the sound of a father he did not yet know as his own. One evening, as the storm raged outside, June found Ray by the hearth, mending a saddle strap. She stood watching him for a long while before speaking. You're careful with us, she said quietly. Ray looked up, his dark eyes steady. I don't want to push where I'm not welcome. Her hands twisted in her skirt. You've carried more than I ever asked. Thomas trusted you, and so do I. But she faltered, searching for words. I feel torn, Ray, between grief and hope, between what I lost and what still lives here. She pressed a hand against her heart. Ray set the leather aside and rose slowly. You don't have to choose tonight. Grief takes its own time. But know this, I will not leave you. Not now, not ever. June's breath caught. Tears welled, but she managed a small nod. I believe you. As spring crept back across the land, color returned to June's cheeks and laughter to the boy's voice. He followed Ray everywhere, asking endless questions about horses, about hunting, about the songs he hummed while working. One afternoon, as Ray lifted him onto the back of a gentle mare, June stood watching from the doorway. The boy grinned wide, gripping the reins as though born to it. For the first time since Thomas's death, June smiled without sadness pulling at the edges. Later that night, after the boy had gone to bed, she sat beside Ray by the fire. He loves you, she said softly. Ray's eyes flicked to her. And I love him, but he should hear the truth from you. When you're ready. June nodded. Her voice trembled. I'll tell him soon. He deserves to know who his father is. She paused, then added, and so do you. That spring, the valley came alive with work. Ray and June repaired fences, planted a small garden, and tended the few cattle Thomas had left. The boy carried water in a tin pail, eager to help. Neighbors came sometimes, bringing seed or tools, offering their quiet support. They did not question Ray's presence. On the frontier, folks understood that survival often forged families in unexpected ways. June found strength in the rhythm of work. In the mornings, she baked bread while Ray saddled the horse. At midday, they ate together in the field, shoulders brushing. Silence is no longer heavy, but companionable. In the evenings, they told stories to the boy by lamplight, Ray of the desert stars, June of books she had loved as a girl. The pain of loss lingered, but slowly, day by day, it was joined by something else, belonging. One warm evening, June finally spoke the truth to her son. She knelt beside him as he played with wooden blocks. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice gentle, "do you know how much your papa loved you?" The boy nodded solemnly. "And do you know," she continued, glancing toward Ray, "that you had another papa before Thomas? A brave man who went away and who didn't know you were coming into the world?" The child looked up, eyes wide. "Who?" June swallowed, her hand trembling as she touched his cheek. "Ray. He's your true father." The boy blinked, studying Ray with surprising seriousness. Then, without hesitation, he scrambled across the floor and into Ray's lap. "Papa," he said simply. Ray's throat closed. He gathered the child against him, his arms strong yet trembling. "Yes, son," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Papa." June watched, tears streaming, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. That summer, life changed in quiet but certain ways. Ray and June moved through the days as partners, working side by side, sharing burdens, laughing softly in the evenings as the boy tumbled sleepily into bed. One afternoon, after a long day mending fences, Ray paused at the ridge where Thomas was buried. June came to stand beside him, the wind stirring her hair. "I feel him here," she said softly, watching, not with anger, but with peace. Ray bowed his head. "He gave us this chance. I'll never forget that." June slipped her hand into his. For a moment, they stood together in silence, honoring the man who had bridged the years between them. Then she turned, meeting Ray's gaze. "I loved him for what he gave. But you—" her voice caught, and she steadied it. "I never stopped loving you. Not once." Ray's heart surged with both joy and sorrow. He cupped her face in his calloused hands, his eyes dark with feeling. "Then let us begin again, June." June. Not as ghosts of what we lost, but as who we are now. She nodded, tears shining. "Yes. Begin again." Their kiss was tender, a promise woven not of passion alone, but of endurance, of forgiveness, of love riven from ashes. By autumn, the valley looked different. Fields yielded grain, the garden ripened, the cattle grew fat. The boy grew stronger, his laughter echoing through the hills. One evening, as the sun sank red behind the mountains, the three of them sat together on the porch. The boy curled against June, already half asleep, while Ray strummed a simple tune on a borrowed guitar. The air smelled of sage and wood smoke, the sky a blaze of stars. June leaned her head on Ray's shoulder, her hand resting on his arm. "After all that's happened," she murmured, "I used to think life had nothing left to give but sorrow. But now—" She looked at him, her eyes luminous in the firelight. "Now I believe in tomorrow again." Ray kissed her hair, his heart full. "Tomorrow is ours to build, together." And as the boy stirred in his sleep, murmuring a wordless dream, Ray and June held each other close, watching the night settle over the land. The frontier was harsh, unforgiving, yet within it they had carved something rare, a home, a family, a love stronger than grief, forged by loss and sealed by hope. For the first time in years, Ray felt whole, and June, once broken by sorrow, now smiled into the dark, knowing she had found her way back, not just to him, but to herself. Together, with their son between them, they were no longer fragments of yesterday. They were a family. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. I'm truly glad you stayed with me. Your support means so much. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so I can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories like this one.